Welcome to Inside Politics, our weekly podcast on a small handful of things you need to know about San Antonio politics. I'm Greg Jefferson, Metro Editor of the San Antonio Express-News. I'm joined today by reporter Madison Iszler and reporter Brooke Park and our special guest, Precinct 2 County Commissioner Justin Rodriguez. Welcome.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. It's good to be back. I think it's been a little while.
Yeah, it's been a bit.
It's been a little while.
Like, last time you were on, it had a different name and a different host.
Right.
Yeah, it was,
and
you could almost say it was like a different.
Yeah,
Gilbert Garcia was here. You could almost say it was a different podcast.
I think I'm showing my age. It used to be podcasts for audio only. Now you guys,
totally. Yeah,
remember those days?
I think you were probably. We used to when we were in the old Express News office. We had it in a closet.
Yeah,
with foam taped to the wall.
Exactly.
That was probably.
I remember that. Yeah, it's much improved. This is great.
Totally. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, it's like the one area where we've actually put a lot of money.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's great to be here. And happy belated Father's Day to you,
you too.
And to all the fathers out there.
All right, you too. You got 2 kids, right?
3.
Oh,
yeah, we've got
awesome.
3. I was mentioning to Brooke.
Are you an empty nester?
We are kind of right. Like we've got 2 that are still in college. So they were back home this weekend or this summer. We've got 1 that's out. So they were all 3 here this weekend. We got to spend a little time with them.
Awesome.
And I wanted to go absolutely nowhere and do absolutely nothing. And we were successful.
That is perfect.
It was awesome. It was
Perfect.
awesome. Yes, it was great.
All right, so we have a lot to talk about this morning. Namely, a venue tax election that I think Bexar County Commissioner's Court is very likely to call sometime in by next couple of months.
Statutorily, the deadline is August 18th. I don't think we're going to wait until that last day to call it, but I think there's a good chance if things keep moving the way they're moving, that we would call that sometime in the month of July.
Okay. So it goes on the ballot. This has a potential to raise about $449 million for various venue tax projects. I think most people are fixated on one project,
right?
That being the downtown Spurs arena. Mm-hmm. And like by our math, once you've got several projects that Commissioner's Court has talked about doing, improvements at the Freeman Coliseum and the Frost Bank Center. After that, you've got about, believe it is $174 million for a Spurs arena, give or take.
Right.
Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's probably a little north of that that would be left over. And I think it's important to kind of reset the conversation a little bit because you remember those of us who were around 25 years ago when the voters approved the venue tax then. That was the only vehicle really that paid for what is now the Frost Bank Center. Obviously, there was some Spurs ownership that went in, but that was $175 million back in 1999 that essentially paid for most of the construction on county land. What we're talking about here is a contribution from the county towards a much bigger price tag of a new arena that would potentially be downtown. So there's still a lot for us to kind of vet over the course of the next few weeks. One of them being how much the city would potentially put into a new arena, how much private dollars would be put into a new arena. So even if it's say closer to that 200 or even 250 that the county would contribute, I mean, we're talking about arenas these days that are north of $1 billion. So, so it's everybody's putting a lot of stock into the county's venue tax election. But again, it's just a portion of a bigger pool of money that would be required for that new arena.
Now, you'd mentioned the venue tax election that built the Frost Bank Center.
Right.
So, I mean, as you're totally aware, there are a lot of residents on the east side who felt like there were promises made to them during that campaign that there would be jobs and economic development and growth kind of following construction of the arena. It may not have been an explicit part of the campaign, but it definitely, that idea definitely took hold during the campaign, and it never really panned out. And I think you can agree with that.
Yeah, and look, I'm gonna plead a little bit of ignorance because I was in law school back during that campaign, so I was not part of that campaign. But I do recall.
You were in Madison.
I was in Madison. Way far away from here. Yeah, the last thing I was thinking about was arena. Yeah, exactly. So, but you're right. I think there were at least conversations, whether it came from the county, the city, the community in general, about what this could potentially do to spur economic development on the east side, surrounding what was then, I guess, the SBC Center. And look, I get what I've seen over the years is there's challenges, right? There are challenges not just with infrastructure and access. You've got a Pacific Union rail line that goes right by there. And then, when you talk about economic development, one of the key underpinnings is density, particularly as it relates to housing. And there's some challenges with developing dense, any kind of economic development around the arena, particularly because the rodeo, we call it sales, San Antonio Livestock Exposition, they need space, right, for their trailers. And again, I know they're only 4 or 5 weeks out of the year, but they're a significant partner to not just the county, but to the community out there. And so I think there were some synergies that maybe just didn't align with respect to density around the arena. But again, I can't speak to what was specifically promised. We just know it's a matter of fact that people go out to a Spurs game these days.
And there's kind of nothing.
There's nothing there. They go to the game's over, and they leave. Right. So, so there's been some challenges, no doubt, and I think probably there's finger pointing to go all around. But I think this is an opportunity for the county to double down and figure out, not just the county, the city too, what can we do to make quality of life better for residents around the east side?
About 2 years ago, so the Express News started breaking news on the possibility of the Spurs relocating to a downtown arena about 2 years ago now. And really, really soon after that first story, we talked to Bexar County Judge Peter Sakai. And one of his earliest messages was, we have to do something to make it right on the east side. We have to do something to spur the kind of development that never happened in the wake of the Frost Bank Center. And it always sounded very clearly to me that the county's participation in whatever the financing package would be for new downtown arena for the Spurs, that was a prerequisite. He had to have a plan before the county would participate, give public dollars. It doesn't seem to me that there's actually a plan in place. So has that fallen by the wayside?
No. I mean, I think, look, to Judge Sakai's credit, and think about this, you've got potentially, Spurs and the city coming to the county saying, hey, give us X number of dollars for an arena 3 miles away that's going to compete, by the way, with your asset, 3 miles away. So on its face, to the judge or any of us could have said, you know what, Spurs City, good luck, go cut your deal. We wish you the best of luck to make it happen. I think the judges, and I don't want to speak for Judge Sakai, but I work closely with him. I think his priority's always been, how can we make sure that there's meaningful investment in the east side? How can we make it better than maybe what was promised previously? And I think that was, 1A. I think 1B was, we want to be good community partners, and we believe the Spurs are essential to not just economic development, but flourishing and quality of life here in San Antonio. What can we do to be good partners to make sure that they stay here? And so he has said from the beginning, we're going to use this venue tax, which is really the county's only vehicle to really make meaningful investment to improve the site, not just the Frost Bank Center, but the Freeman and any vision for a surrounding development. And then secondarily, what we have left, we could potentially contribute to as a partner to the new arena downtown. I think what's part of the question that we have to get answered from the Spurs is, what does the county get in return for that, right? I mean, there were agreements made, again, 25 years ago. For the most part, I think any neutral observer would look at that agreement and say, look, the Spurs got a pretty good deal. They get all the parking, a great deal.
You could almost say a sweetheart deal.
I mean, great deal, right?
Where they keep all the revenue.
Yeah.
I mean,
what would you think would be a good deal for Beale County?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess you got to look at it as, what is our fraction of participation in the development, right? So I think it's not just what's in it for the county, but what's in it for the community, right? And we don't know what that looks like yet. But I will say this, again, I wasn't there 25 years ago, but they're going to be hard pressed to get the same kind of deal, I think, at this juncture, right? All revenues, concessions, parking, naming rights. But again, the context back then was, and maybe it's not too dissimilar from now, is, well, someone else would be willing to give us all that. I think New Orleans back then had a new arena. They were looking for an expansion team. Look, I've not been given any direct or even indirect threat that the Spurs are really realistically looking to move from San Antonio. I just think it's a competitive market. We're San Antonio, right? We don't have the big market that some of these other places have in terms of media exposure, corporate sponsorships. So it's a unique culture that they built here in San Antonio. I think we all want to be part of a solution, but I think we also have to answer that question. What does the county get in return? What does the city get in return? Ultimately, what does the community get in return? I think those things have to be answered before we can run a successful election to get this first kind of tranche passed, right? Because then they're still going to have a discussion at the city from their multiple resources, what they're going to do.
What would the county need to get in return for you to feel comfortable voting to support and call for that venue tax election?
Yeah, I'd be spitballing a little bit. I mean, I think obviously some revenue would be great, but I think also maybe more importantly, some commitment to be a partner on the east side in whether it's through the Spurs themselves, maybe a private development company. We've also talked at length about the Willow Springs golf course there that's adjacent to the Frostbank Center. Could that be something that potentially the Spurs could help with in terms of spurring some other economic development opportunity? So I don't have an answer directly for you now, but I think those are things that'll happen in terms of negotiations. And I think, from my participation in any meetings, everybody's willing to try and come to the table and have a solution that everybody can live with, right? And I think, again, whether it's just simply revenues, I mean, everybody's fighting for revenues at this point, right? So I don't know if that's the answer. This current agreement that we're in, by the way, the Spurs are under their contract with the county through 2032. Right. They basically pay us rent, which is a little over $1 million a year. Not a whole lot of money, but it keeps the lights on. And so, something I think more than that would be, I think, obvious that we'd have to ask for.
Any idea what kind of ownership structure you'd have on a new Spurs arena? So if the county is going to contribute, you would think that the county's going to own a little piece of it.
Right.
It's not a gift, or is it?
No. Hey, look,
what have been? What
pretty confident? Right. I say it's not going to be
not a freebie.
It's not a charity.
Right. Well, I would say, given that, then, I mean, what kind of discussions have there been about the ownership structure?
So I think those discussions are just starting, right? Because again, it's hard to compare it to the current structure because the county owns the grounds, they own the facility. Yeah. So we have the Coliseum Advisory Board that's kind of the landlord, so to speak. We would have to have, I think, some governance structure that has the county at the table, whether it's a local government authority that oversees it, joint city and county, maybe similar to what we're having discussions on with the baseball stadium. So I think there have to be some oversight there. There's no question about it. And what, we've got, probably lawyers, better lawyers than me that are looking at that to try and figure out what's the best deal for the county.
Does that have to be hashed out before you're comfortable calling for venue tax election?
I think maybe not all the details, but I think an outline of some agreement will have to be. I mean, I don't know that we could go out to our constituents and in good conscience say, hey, let's contribute this dollar amount without knowing what the county's role will be in some of those future developments or just the oversight of the arena itself.
One of the projects that voters might see on their ballot come November is from the rodeo leaders and the Coliseum Advisory Board leaders. Yeah. That would be, just for our listeners who don't know, an $197 million plan to build some new buildings, renovate some existing buildings, year-round programming from the rodeo. Is that enough to keep the grounds viable to create that activity, or do you think more is needed?
Like if the Spurs are gone.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Cody Davenport and his team are very bullish, no pun intended, right, on what the rodeo can do year round on programming, not just concerts, but other rodeo style events throughout the year. And so I think that with some of that investment, certainly there's potential to make it happen. Again, we've seen a nice presentation. I've seen it maybe twice. But I do think this. I mean, I think that it's enough to keep the buildings, I think, 21st century. I think it's enough to invest in some new exhibit halls that will, potentially kind of complement maybe the convention center. They already do at the Freeman some smaller convention type stuff. But I do believe that there will have to be some private equity involved at some point in redevelopment, whether it is adjacency, hotel, restaurants, commercial. So that's going to have to come, and there's going to have to be some buy-in. I don't know that we're going to get that commitment.
Is that why we keep hearing about Willow Springs Municipal Golf Course from? I mean, it comes up on the county side.
It does.
This is a city asset.
It is.
It looks like you guys want.
Yeah.
Most of it's in a floodplain.
It is.
It is. So there's not a terrible lot you can do with redeveloping that property.
There's not. I mean, I think there's been, again, this is just conjecture, some discussion about could you make, and I've actually, we were talking before we went on the air. I'm not much of a golfer. I tried, but I've never played Willow Springs, but I've heard it's a very long 18-hole course. So there's been some discussion about, could you shorten it, on one hand, or even make it a par 3 9-hole course as an amenity to potentially putting on the frontage side, some development, right? Whether it's hotel, conference space. Right. So again, these are just ideas. I mean, I will say this. I mean, I think that at some point in the near future, there'll be requests for proposals on what potentially partners could do with the site. And again, we can assume that maybe Willow Springs is part of that, but that still has to be negotiated. I know the city has not agreed to anything in principle or otherwise. So there's still a lot of speculation at this point.
So there's been in July, we hear that's when all three parties, the city, county, and the Spurs, are going to pony up. And here's how much we're willing to put in. Financing for a new Spurs arena. First of all, have you gotten any indication from the Spurs how much they're willing to put in?
No, I'm not myself, and I've had several conversations with them. But I will say this: I mean, the next few weeks are critical because when you think about it, and I've said this to some of my constituents, it's hard for me to ask you to support this if we have no idea that if it's, let's just say 250 million that goes to the new arena. Is a drop in the bucket with respect to the rest of the puzzle. Is that squeeze worth the juice? Right? We don't know. And so I would anticipate that certainly before we call the election, we will have a harder number from the Spurs in terms of what their commitment has to be, and a harder number from the city in terms of what that rest of the puzzle looks like.
Now, as part of the city part of it, are you going to have any kind of agreement on development around the grounds, like Willow Springs?
Right.
My question, what I'm really trying to get at is, are you going to ask voters in November to approve a venue tax election when you've not done anything to redress what didn't happen?
Right. I don't anticipate that'll be part of the ballot language. We're not there yet, but
no. I mean that you can say to voters on the east side, look, we have an agreement with the city.
Right.
We're getting Willow Springs or whatever.
Right.
It is.
Right.
So we promise you, there is a development coming.
Yeah.
You're going to be able to say that?
I mean, sitting here today, I'm not comfortable we can get there within the next few weeks, but I'm confident that the discussions that I've heard or been a part of, something will be more concrete by the time this goes to voters. And honestly, even before that, by the time the commissioners have to call for the election, because this is not a leap of faith, right? We've got to have some degree of certainty what the end development agreement may look like, and to be able to sell it to our constituents, right, in good conscience. How do we do that without knowing more of the details? Maybe not all of the details, but more of the details.
Yeah.
I think it's clear to say that voters have a lot of questions about plan, especially those on the east side. Commissioner Tommy Calvolt held 2 town halls, well-attended, hundreds of people came to kind of give their ideas on how they would like the county to redevelop the Frost Bank Center and the Coliseum grounds. And they threw out a lot of different ideas, affordable housing, workforce development, pickleball fields. And as you know from your time at City Hall, on the city side, when they have bond proposals, they have citizen advisory committees, they talk about programs ad nauseum, and there was a lot of community input into what exactly is going to be on bond proposals.
Right.
What kind of citizen input has been funneled directly to what is going to be on this venue tax?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that some of the input that Commissioner Calvert got from the Precinct 4 community has been listened to, obviously. I think the details, I mean, some of the things you mentioned that are compatible with the development of the vision for the rodeo, right? So you mentioned the pickleball tournaments and the multi-use courts. That is part of their proposal. And so look, I'm with you. I think there needs to be more community input, and I think we need to get, kind of hone that in a little bit better because, as you all know, there's been, I think rightly so, some lack of transparency terms used in towards the city and the county, in fairness. I think we're going to have our work cut out for us over the course of the summer, really, to make sure the community understands what we're asking for. And I think too, I think that's why it's kind of broad, and this is not a very complicated initiative. If it goes just the two items, one for redevelopment of Freeman, Frost Bank, Rodeo, one referendum for the potential new arena. So, but again, what that looks like and the details, I agree. I think there needs to be more community input. And I'm hopeful that we've got time to do that, like I said, over the course of the next couple weeks.
And I wanted to get more clarity on what the consultants recommended for the Frost Bank Center. A few months ago, they said y'all would need to put in about $78 million to keep the arena up to date, assuming that it's going to keep holding an NBA team. Like locker rooms need to be updated, TVs need to be updated. So do you plan on asking voters to send the venue tax to update the FPC for basketball upgrades that won't be needed in 5 years?
No, my understanding is there's still discussion between the county and the Spurs on what they are responsible for. In the contract, they are responsible for maintenance. And so, things like escalators and elevators and technology, some of those things they're required under contract to contribute. So I don't know the exact number, but that will not be on the ballot as far as my understanding is the Spurs and the county are working through those issues in kind of phases and what will be required over the course, let's say, over the next 18 months, 3 years, 4 years. But a lot of those things are just kind of wear and tear, HVAC, elevators, escalators, things like that. But that won't be going to the voters.
Assuming the Spurs leave, the rodeo folks have said they want to attract more concerts to the Frost Bank Center, that it could be used for that. Then you've got the Alamo Dome. Maybe you have another new arena for the Spurs downtown. How do you keep those venues from cannibalizing each other? Are there really enough events to go around?
I mean, I think that's a great question in a market our size, right? Are we going to be competing against each other? And so I think that's why part of the arrangement, and again, I don't know what this looks like, but I think there's got to be some synergy with the parties in terms of management, right? And I don't know if that means the local government authority oversees all three of them, but I think that they're the rodeo saying, look, we're going to chase more country western, maybe Tejano. They think there's a market. Right now, Fort Worth, and I've not been, but Fort Worth and the Stockyards is kind of a destination for country western. rodeo. According to their study, a lot of those folks come from San Antonio and South Texas, and so they think there's a market between Mexico and San Antonio to attract not just concerts, but also events and rodeo type events. And so I think that's something we don't know the answer to, right? And I think that before we go too far to get how much are they giving? How much are we giving? I think the management of the facilities has to be answered.
Yeah, because what you've got is, it seems, to the outsider, looks really kind of scary.
Yeah.
If you own any one of these facilities, because you've got the Alamo Dome, which it's got a number of smaller conventions.
Yeah.
It's got they've got trade shows, they've got gun shows, and they've got concerts.
Yeah.
And then you've got the Frost Bank Center. And then the Spurs Arena,
Yeah.
Their season isn't year round.
Yeah.
It'll be a multi-use facility, so they'll also be, you're talking concerts.
And let's be real, there's a little bit of competition already going on. I think the convention center downtown would love to have some of these Comic Cons that seem to be the Freeman seems to have the market on, right? And so look, I think everyone has to be on the same page, and I think we're getting there. We're not there yet, but I think it's too important to make sure that the Spurs have a home here for the next 50 years. Hopefully, I know they just celebrated 50 years. We've not been given any indication that they are looking elsewhere, but it's pretty clear, and it became clear early on, that they were not intending to stay at the Frost Bank Center beyond the term of the contract, which is, again, 2032. Yeah. So what that looks like, again, I think Judge Sakai's perspective, and I share it, is let's at least be at the table to try and come up with a solution and be good community partners.
So Judge Sakai, it was in talking with reporters right after his State of the County address, and he said it in other venues, that he's not going to be the county judge under which the Spurs leave San Antonio. Yeah. Is that you're a lawyer? It seems like a bad bargaining position. Am I wrong?
Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know if you want.
It's you're not coming at it from a position of strength.
Exactly. Never negotiate against yourself. Yeah. I mean, look, I think it was a sentiment, and Judge Sakai, if nothing else, is a San Antonian, South Texas through and through, and I think he wanted to make it clear. I think to San Antonio and the residents and our constituents that the Spurs mean something, and the Spurs, the fabric of San Antonio is interwoven with the Spurs and vice versa, right? So I think that maybe he was speaking from his heart in saying that. And look, it's hard for me sometimes too, because I grew up, sometimes sneaking into the Hemisphere when there were only like 3,000 people in there. From
what I heard, it was actually pretty easy to do.
It was very easy. They would just wave you in. Come on. If the game started, come on in. But so sometimes, even myself, you've got to remove, your hat as a Spurs fan. And your hat as a policymaker and doing what's in the best interest of the county. So I think, would we all be devastated if the Spurs decided to leave? Certainly, but we also have to make good business decisions, and it has to make sense for our constituents. And so I think that's when the judge kind of put his Spurs flag down and said they're not leaving under my watch. I think that's where he was speaking from.
So your precinct 2, takes in the west side and part of downtown.
Western Virginia.
So you're not going to, like Project Marvel, which is in the southeast corner, that's not yours.
Man, how long did it take you to make Project Marvel? Or like 20 minutes in.
It's like, that's the thing about Project, it's going to come. Exactly. We don't have to rush it. It's part of every conversation.
No. So I do not have any of
so you don't have a piece
the Hemisphere.
But you must have an opinion.
Well, look, I do.
I mean, you're a former city councilman. You kind of know how the city works.
Look, I mean, I think the entirety of it is visionary. It is, obviously, you've seen the videos and the presentations. It is spectacular, but and ambitious. I would also say it is a little bit of I would say it's multi-phased, right? I mean, there's nothing that you can do no matter, how much money you had, and make that happen overnight, right? I mean, I think part of it was, Mayor Nirenberg wanting to put out a vision for what could potentially be a downtown entertainment district. And so, look, I think the arena that we're a part of in terms of any discussions is the only part we're a part of. But I know that they've got visions for land bridge and infrastructure and hemisphere. Look, I'm supportive in the sense that, I think it moves the needle for economic development downtown, where I think it needs to happen. But I'm also cautious because that is a very expensive price tag when you look at it in its entirety. And there's no way you can do it over just a couple of years. I mean, that's probably a 10, 15 year, if not longer project. But I would say this, and having been at the city, and it's been a while, but the convention and visitor space is important for the community, right? And if they are saying, and I haven't seen any local or recent, I should say, studies, but if they're saying now, Austin's building a new convention center, Houston's building a new convention center, in order to stay competitive, we have to do some expansion, renovation. I would be supportive of that, again, within reason. The one piece that I haven't seen any numbers to justify is there's a talk of a new convention center hotel. Again, I assume they've done all their homework. That is something that's required when you look at, again, competing against some of our sister Texas cities. So look, I'm supportive of having the conversation. Going back to our point a few minutes ago, could there be more transparency about it? Absolutely. And however the timing played out, you can't go back and put that toothpaste back in the tube. But now's the time to start having those conversations. And again, that's not even something that's going to be, my understanding, on a ballot this year. They're going to have, I think, some discussions about maybe infrastructure around the downtown area on potentially a November ballot. Right. But again, the city's pool of resources are very different from ours. I mean, ours are the county, very limited.
By the way, can you just quickly, and we should have maybe done this earlier, define for us when we say venue tax, what are we talking about?
So the legislature passed, I guess it was in the late 90s, the venue tax vehicle, which essentially says for the county, we can assess a 5% tax on rental cars, short-term rental cars within the community, and a 1.75% hotel tax on occupancy tax. And so part of this discussion is under statute, we can raise that with voter approval, the 1.75, the 2%. And so when you compare that, let's just take that hotel motel tax, for example. I believe the city's is 9%. It's significantly higher, the hot tax, they call it the hot tax. So this is the portion that just comes back to the county. As you know, that is a revenue source that we can issue debt, pay it back as, kind of like you do on a mortgage, right? And so that's the county's portion. I don't want to get too bogged down on the city's portion, but the county's right now, 1.75 hot tax, 5% motor vehicle tax. So that would be the revenues that were pledged for this $450 million that we're talking about.
So the city has many more ways of paying for this stuff. Now, kind of think about it as an old campaign hand, right? Like it seems to me like this could potentially be a really difficult campaign, both for the venue tax election, at least the portion to pay for a Spurs arena, and if the city puts up a bond issue on the November ballot specifically for infrastructure around what would be the arena site. Are you worried at all about the politics of that? I mean, where do you think San Antonio voters are? Is it going to pass or not?
I think. Sure, you're always a little bit worried. I think, as someone that's been through a number of campaigns, if you're not worried, something's wrong, or at least anxious, right? Because you don't know what's in the mind of the voters. I mean, I think we just saw, a mayoral election where, I think people felt a certain way. But until those numbers actually come out at, 7-10, you don't know. And so, look, I think that on the one hand, the venue tax, I feel like let the county run with it and let that be on its own merit, right? If you do it parallel with some kind of infrastructure improvement investment, then look, naturally, here's what I think as a voter. For both, what's in it for me, right? Maybe I don't go downtown, or maybe I can't afford to go to Spurs games. And I think it's part of why I guess it was the 2008 venue tax election was pretty successful. Was you had a mix of community projects in there. You had parks, and you had green space, and you had the Tobin. And then when the city goes out for bond elections, and having been there, I think 2007, when I first got on the council, there was a bond election. It's always about, you go to your neighborhood group and what's in it for District 7, when I was on District 7 back then. What flood control projects, what's park projects. So that's in the back of my mind a little bit of a worry, right? Is that these are projects that are solely based on the urban core, which I'm a big believer in. I mean, I do believe that you have to have strong downtowns, just like you have to have a strong heart to have a strong body. I think downtowns make great cities, and but again, you're going to have probably some folks that are campaigning against this thing, and I think that what we need to caution folks about is this is, from my estimation, it shouldn't be an either or proposition, right? We had, for example, some folks from Cops Metro come to our last commissioners court meeting because we were talking about this resolution to send to the comptroller that kind of starts the clock on this election. And they talked about affordable housing, and they talked about wages, poverty and infrastructure. Those are all things we agree that need to be addressed. And in fact, I would say both the city and county have addressed those over the years and will continue to address those. But I think we get distracted by, well, this venue tax is just for Spurs and for billionaires, and we can't do both, right?
I mean, it's important to know that Cops Metro, they're against using any public financing.
Sure, yeah.
So that you start out with them in opposition.
Sure, and I've had a great relationship with Cops Metro for a long time, and I get that. But my point to them is, this specific vehicle for the county, venue tax, is a limited purpose, right? And so we cannot use that for affordable housing projects. We just got through probably putting $30 million of ARPA dollars into affordable housing projects. We put, we stood up a behavioral health department within the county. We're building a new public health school at UHS. So you can do both, right? And I think that's the argument I would make is, look, if this is important to San Antonio and it's important to keep the Spurs, then let's talk about that. And then separate, let's talk about how we need to improve quality of life and close the gap on generational poverty. I mean, those are things that people should care about and we care about, but they can both happen is my argument.
Now, to switch gears a little bit, and you might be thankful. We're not going to talk.
Oh boy,
we're done. We're done.
Yeah,
we're done talking about
done with the arena. Okay, great.
Yeah, it's only been 40 minutes.
So the last 30 seconds.
Yeah. So in the last couple of weeks, Bexar County District Attorney Joe Gonzalez announced he is not going to be seeking re-election. First of all, was that a surprise to you?
You know
or
what?
Were you kind of anticipating?
It wasn't a shocker, and I worked well with Joe and know him well. I know that he's got a daughter that's growing up and is living in New York, and I think obviously that means a lot to him to try and be there for her and his family. And look, we also know the political reality is that it's a tough environment. I mean, it's a tough environment. We've seen what's happened this weekend with protests and the threats on folks. I don't think it was shocking, but I think he was it was, I guess the surprising part was the timing of it. I thought it was a little bit early to make that declaration.
Do you think he hurt himself by announcing so early? I mean, he's making himself a lame duck.
Yeah.
Whatever
I mean, he was already kind of struggling.
Yeah. Whatever he wants for the budget. This
didn't matter.
I mean, he would come to commissioners cold and be like, I can't retain my attorneys. The indictment is going through the roof.
And we've always been pretty supportive, and we've increased the wages there at the DA's office. I think a couple times the last budget cycles, we've given new positions. So yeah, I mean, I was going to joke and say, forget whatever you want this summer, Joe. But I don't know that he hurt himself. I think maybe it was a relief for him that he wanted to just get it off his chest, and then also to give others that are thinking about it an opportunity to start lining up support.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, believe it or not, I know we just got through a runoff election, but filing for 2026 is in November, right around the corner. So yeah, I mean, I think people are starting.
Judge Fred Ronhill, he's
Judge Ronhill.
He's put together an exploratory committee, a PAC, just to kind of explore it. Have you heard any other names?
I have not. No, I've heard on both sides, Republicans and Democrats, there's some interest, but I've not heard any specific names yet.
Now, I mean, you were a deputy prosecutor, so
you know what? I left those.
That was like
those years behind. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Anytime I talk about being a baby prosecutor, it was like over 20 years ago. Yeah. No, look, I respect that position. I think there are people out there that are well qualified who have been practicing in the courtrooms for years. I think that's important to have some of that criminal law experience. I've not done criminal law for probably 20 years. And so, I mean, it is an administrative position, but you have to be able to empathize with those that are in the courtroom. You're prosecutors. It's a tough job. So I'm hopeful there'll be a number of people that are well qualified to jump in.
Yeah. So before we move on from the DA, I mean, it's, the turnover in his office is really remarkable. Deputy prosecutors are taking off for the hinterlands. They're getting, they're either going into private practice and making a ton more money, or they're going to suburban cities, suburban counties, and making as much, if not more, as they are here. And on top of that, you have like this pile of
backlog.
The backlog of criminal felony cases that have not gone to the jail. How much is he responsible for that? For either the turnover or the backlog of criminal felony cases?
So look, I mean, it's hard to have that discussion without talking about COVID, right? And I know we're a few years removed from that, but I think COVID changed or played a factor in a couple of those. One, the backlog, right? I mean, I think he's chipping away at that. We've given him additional resources to try and address that. But then also with respect to being able to compete with other communities, COVID in some ways changed that as well, where you've got some surrounding counties. They say, oh, you can come in and work remotely, or you can come in 2 days a week and work remotely the other days. You can't really get away with that in a large urban county like ours. But look, turnover in those offices are a reality. I mean, I was there for a year, primarily because I got offered a job in the private sector that paid more, and I was starting a family. So we're never going to be able to compete with private sector type compensation. But I think to the degree that there's more flexibility, I'm sure he's looked at all of that, right? So it's hard for me to point a finger at Joe. It's a hard job. He's got several hundred lawyers there. So, I guess it might be technically the biggest law firm in the town, right? So that's a tough thing to say. I mean, I will say this: turnover is part of any of those positions. We've done our best through the budget to try and make it competitive, at least with some of the surrounding counties. But again, I don't blame folks for saying, look, I can go to Kerr or Williamson and work, get paid more, and have more flexible hours.
Have you gotten an update on the indictment backlog? Because last time Joe Gonzalez came to the court, he had changed the parameter, so you couldn't really tell whether or not it was being
so we have not. We're due. I think you were there, Brooke, that court meeting, and it was really hard to follow because it was Joe speaking to us from the podium. with no presentation. And so we've asked him to come back and actually give us some data with, a hard copy of comparatives and numbers. So I don't know if it's this next court meeting, but soon he's due to come back with that information.
So Judge Sakai, I believe he's already announced that he's going to be seeking re-election next year. Do you endorse him? Like, are you going to be behind him?
Yeah. I mean, look, we've not had that conversation, but last time I did not endorse Judge Sakai in the primary. I had a former colleague from the legislature, Minhada's run. Ultimately, I did endorse him, obviously, in the general. But look, I fully intend to support Judge Sakai. I'm also on the ballot at the same time he is for re-election. And so, yeah, look, I think he's done an honorable job. I think he's a good man. I've had the opportunity and the privilege to serve now with Nelson and Peter. Do they have different styles? Absolutely, right? I mean, Nelson kind of wrote the book on this stuff, but Judge Sakai is very deliberate when he comes to making decisions. Obviously, he was on the bench as a traditional district court judge for over 20 years. And so I think that's his nature, to kind of be more deliberative and listen. Right. But yeah, I intend to, if he asks for my endorsement, he hasn't yet, but if he does, certainly would be supportive.
His first year in office seemed pretty chaotic. And we were hearing from, folks in county government that it was hard to get in front of him. It was hard to get a meeting with him. There was no clear mandate for them, and you had a lot of county departments just kind of wondering what's up, just having a real lack of direction. Yeah. First of all, is that accurate?
I don't know that that's fair. I think that anytime you have a change from someone who's been in that office for 25 years, anybody in comparison is going to have a different style, a different kind of way of doing things. So look, I mean, I think that, again, I don't know. I mean, I know his staff. I don't know anybody that's said to me directly they can't get through to him. But look, I think he does have a large staff, and good people. I think compared to Nelson was very lean, right? I mean, in terms of his staff, he and he almost used David Smith, our county manager, as his de facto staffer, right? In terms of executing policy. So look, I mean, I think there's going to be, you got to give someone a little runway when it comes to taking over for someone like Nelson. And to his credit, he's got a different style. He's got a different way of operating. So, I mean, I heard some of those rumblings. I didn't necessarily experience that. I think it was just a matter of him getting his feet settled, getting his staff together. And Brooke's been there. I mean, I think he's asserting himself a lot more in discussions and taking the lead on things. I mean, I think he's done that kind of behind the scenes previously, but I think he's now being a little more vocal in court in terms of what direction he'd like the court to go. So yeah, I mean, look, I don't think it's fair to say, it was a rough start. I think it was just kind of a ramp up to getting his feet settled in a significant transition, right? I mean, you think about when you're a district court judge, that is your courtroom, and what you says for the most part goes. This is commissioner's court's a collaborative environment, right? I mean, you've got to be able to communicate and talk to folks. And someone told me the other day, it's called commissioner's court for a reason. It's not county judge's court, and so you've got to, and so I think that took some time for him to figure out. But I think he and I've worked well together, and I've known the Judge Sakai, practiced before him, 20 plus years ago. And he's very smart and dogged. And I think, he's, absolutely someone that won't have trouble getting reelected, I don't think.
Say, hypothetically, that Ron Nirenberg, who's about to leave office, decides next year to, I don't know, seek the Democratic nomination with the county. Does that change your
Ron's a friend.
Plans at all?
Yeah, I mean, look, Ron's a friend and admire the tenure he's given and the time he's given to the city. But from my estimation, I would have to stick with the guy I work with now, and that's Judge Sakai.
Yeah.
And I think Ron would understand that if he decided to do that.
By the way,
that's a big if.
Yeah, it's probably important to note he's not actually.
Yeah, and I think he's stated that he's not really interested.
I think he's going to Italy for a couple of
years. Yeah.
Thinking about his future.
Yeah, exactly.
He's going to teach at Trinity, but I don't think he's committed. I don't think he said what he's going to do politically, but
he's got a couple more days.
Yeah, I was going to say. Well, about 3 days.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it just keeps, and as you would expect. I mean, he's leaving office. Nobody knows. His path isn't clear politically, so it kind of stands to reason that.
And Ron's is still young, and I say that because I'm older than him. He's got a lot to give to the community, and he loves public service. And he said it before. He didn't realize how much he loved it until he got into the positions that he was in. And he loves this community. And so I think he's going to try and figure out a way to stay in service in some capacity. But, I've not heard, at least recently, that he's thinking about running for county judge.
All right. Yeah. One last thing.
Yeah.
You had a brutal budget season.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Like it's from my understanding, it's going to be an ugly one, kind of like at the city of San Antonio. They've got a deficit. They've got to close about $31 million.
Yeah.
What's Commissioner's Court? What are you coming up?
So look, it's not as dire as I think some would paint it. And in some ways, my experience in working budgets all the way back to the legislature and school board is almost the less money you have to fight over, the better, right? But we're not, I don't think, in the same position the city is for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think growth overall has kind of flattened out for the community. We're still growing, and there's still a lot of people coming here. And in fact, to our benefit, a lot of the new construction is happening in the unincorporated parts of the county. And so whereas the city's, I think, projecting, 2 or 2.5% growth year over year, ours is closer to 3.5%. But when you compare that to the last few years where it's been closer to 5% or 5.5%, sure, it's tapering off. And by the way, in about 3 years, we run out of these ARPA dollars that we've put into place in a lot of meaningful areas. So we have to start planning for that. I think that's where the tougher decision comes, right? A lot of that money we use as one-time investments, which is a smart thing. But we also invested in, I mentioned the affordable housing. We also invested in programmatic changes to improve response time for our deputies to address mental health crisis as opposed to uniformed personnel, more bed space. So there are programs that I think we stood up, the school-based initiative for mental health, that we're going to have to figure out how to continue those. So I think this budget, we need to start thinking ahead to that. But I think this budget will be fine. I think we'll it'll be tight, but I think we'll get through it. But I think that in the coming years, we'll have to start planning for when that money drops off, how do we make up for it? And again, I think, knock on wood, the city and the county are doing great. The people still want to come here, believe it or not, even though it's 100 degrees in May. But
we know the Germans don't.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not willing to take a transatlantic flight.
That's true. That's a good point.
At least not on Condor.
But yeah, that's right.
But go ahead.
But yeah, no. So I think that, I guess the one place I'm envious of my friends at the city is, lo and behold, you get a big pot of CPS money in the middle of the summer.
You guys, have you ever thought about just buying a utility?
You know what? We ought to. We've had that discussion because think about this. I don't know the exact number, but I know it's probably hundreds of millions of dollars that's collected from those ratepayers who live in unincorporated Bexar County, who, by the way, don't have board representation, nor did they get any benefit from that, right? I mean, a lot of that CPS money, the city, goes back into infrastructure within the city. We don't get that out there. So, there's always some discussion about how do we change that? We have to do something, I think, legislatively. But, I've got a great relationship with Rudy Garza over there at CPS. He's doing a great job. But yeah, in fairness to our constituents, it'd be great to have some of those dollars come in back into the unincorporated area, particularly as it relates to infrastructure. But I think that's, spoiler alert, I think that saves the city this summer when they get that check from CPS. I think they're going to be okay.
You aren't suggesting there's going to be a windfall.
Yeah, no windfall, but I think they're going to be okay. Sorry, Eric Walsh, to give that away, but I think they're going to be they're going to be fine.
Yeah. And I think with these budget seasons that'll going to be hitting the county in the next few years, the American Rescue Plan Act funding is going to be the big question. County got around $400 million in 2021 when then President Biden authorized those funds. And like you said, you have funded several programs, including millions of dollars for public health program staffing. And those are staff positions that are going out and they're doing behavioral health, public health services, the county. All those staffing positions going to be continued?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have to figure out a way to keep the ones that we deem essential, right? And part of the reason, I work pretty closely with Judge Wolf on that. I mean, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it was at least $100 million, if not somewhere between 100 and 200 million. Of that 400 million, we put into preventative health and public health. And so we did that very intentionally because obviously part of the significant cause of the COVID pandemic was public health disparities, right? And so how do we not address, at least trying to become a little bit more resilient when the next public health crisis happens. So I think we're going to have to figure out how to prioritize that. For my estimation, a lot of those are essential positions, and I think it's a core county function that we invest in public health. So we'll have to figure out a way to fund them.
Do you know how much of the $400 million is via coin fees, and they won't just those one time hit and done?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I would guess at least $100 million probably is. Again, over the course of the 5 or 6 years, that's probably we'll have to figure out how to make up for that in some way.
I'm going to end the interrogation here.
Oh, okay, all right. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
Absolutely,
Rodriguez.
Thanks
really
for having
appreciate
me.
you for dropping by. Thank you for watching. If you have not signed up for the ENside Politics newsletter, I'm shocked. It's been over a year now, I think, and you're really way behind. But we're going to end on a positive note. Just drop down to the show notes, click on the link to our newsletter, and fill it out or do whatever you have to do. Just get the newsletter, and we will see you next week. Thank you very much.